Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this Decline Decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And today, I am going to once again be talking about the Lotus Eaters because frankly I think they have a bit of a problem when it comes to their analysis. Now originally I was going to be reacting to Carl's Is Farage Even Right Wing video, which is just so absurd I of course felt like I had to make a video. However, another video came out that was even more absurd that I had to cover. You'll also notice that in the image I've put, because it happened to come up when I was searching for the thumbnail of the video, Farage's Leader of the Right that was 8 months ago. It's amazing how much people can change their opinions on someone, frankly based really nothing upon someone else's word, or other people's words. And this is what we're getting into. So there was a half-hour chat between Carl Benjamin and Ben Habib with the title "What Comes Next," in which it was less of an interview, I'd say, more of a chat. It doesn't really matter, but they obviously discuss what Reform did to Rupert Lowe and what the future for the British right holds. And an awful lot is revealed by Ben Habib in this entire discussion, and we're going to go through it because there is certainly a narrative here that Reform don't feel like they can really put forward because they can't talk an awful lot about the investigation, and frankly they don't want to get bogged down in what is effectively internet drama, because it's been, nearly a week at this point. And generally what I've seen from Reform members is effectively they're really annoyed that the top brass are having this spat, but ultimately they are continuing their work with the party because they still have belief in it, and they're basically waiting to see what the result of all these investigations are, whether they're true or not. Some people have their flags in different areas, but ultimately a lot of people do have the mindset of, effectively like mine, just wait until the investigation's actually complete, then we can make good and proper conclusions and analysis. The online right, though, they're going down an awful lot of assumptive paths, and I think it's going to end up with a lot of them with egg on their face. And this interview should really make a lot of people in Camp Low quite suspicious of the whole thing, so I don't really want to waste too much of your time. I'm going to react to a lot of this, so let's just get into it.
Nigel, where do I start? So let me go right to the nub of the issue, I think. And it's this: Nigel is a narcissist. But when a man controls the political party, when he makes himself the center of attention, doesn't allow anyone else to come forward, crushes anyone that actually could share the limelight with him, and in order to deliver the country to safety, you would need a team of Samsons, and they would have to share the limelight with him.
Already, this is stuff that's just nonsense as far as I can tell. It seems to be a large-scale meme that Nigel is indeed a narcissist and will crush any enemy opposition within the party. I don't particularly buy this because with all these people coming out, Godfrey Bloom, Catherine Blakelock, who actually founded the Brexit Party, they're typically kicked out for decent reason. Godfrey Bloom, it was, I know what everyone's going to say, yes, they were jokes about cleaning behind the fridge and Bongo Land and what have you. The fact of the matter is that optics do matter in politics, and it's not incredibly difficult to understand that. And I get kind of fed up with the online right saying, no, you just have to be bombastic like Trump, blah, 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 blah. One, we're not America, so no, for a start. Secondly, if we actually look to countries that are slightly more similar to our system, such as in Europe, places like the Swedish Democrats. Now, they were relatively extreme a few years ago. They actually started moderating their message over the past few years because optics matter. They're now in government and they have net emigration over in Sweden. The fact of the matter is that you obviously have to temper your optics, and I think what really happens here is that all of these people who either who say they're thrown under the bus or get kicked out, usually there's good reason for it. And Farage has been in this game for decades. He understands, probably more than anyone, that not giving the mainstream media ammo is probably a very high priority and is a very good priority, because giving your enemy ammo is obviously stupid. So when they have ammo he knows he's going to have to deal with for some time, and it gets him off message and not actually being able to put forward, policy, ideas and points that he actually wants to get across. It's better just to get rid of them, and there is justified reason to get rid of them, obviously. You don't want people who are bringing your party into disrepute here. And this is what's happened with Rupert Lowe as well. this was all kept under wraps, and I want to make this point with Ben Habib as well. This was all kept under wraps for some time. If people in the party are to be believed, there have been tensions for some time, and basically nobody knew about this for months on end. And this was the same with Ben Habib. Ben Habib, as he will go into later, and as he said before actually, he was a pain to Nigel Farage. He was constantly trying to put forward his criticisms that he came out with in that leaving video he did, and they're very similar to points that Carl has made in his advice for Farage video. And as I went through in that, it's nonsense, because it's either stuff they were already doing, or it's just stuff that maybe they should be doing, but it's very low priority at the moment. And Ben Habib left of his own volition. When it comes to the Rupert Lowe story, again, both these people, the issues were kept under wraps. The only time Farage came out publicly to attack them was effectively to defend himself. Oh, they've come out and said this, and it's just total nonsense. It's not really the character of a narcissist to do that, to effectively wait until he's attacked and then reasonably defend himself, and then not even go into the real details as to why he's basically happy about this, or why... Because, let's put it this way, Nigel Farage is going to know why Rupert Lowe is doing what he's doing, and the only reason he gives to the public as to why Rupert Lowe is doing this is because, oh, maybe he wants to be Prime Minister. Now, I don't think that's actually necessarily true, and I don't think that's necessarily what Nigel Farage believes the case to actually be. However, I think it's the least offensive reason that he could throw out there. And that is clearly somewhat party lines, because Isabel Oakeshott, who I agree should never be on TV again representing reform, was saying the same thing, if a lot more patronisingly. And this is a thing that I constantly want to get across. I am trying to be as reasonable and unbiased about this as possible. If it turns out that Rupert Lowe is completely vindicated in the right and all these charges were trumped up, fair enough, but I'm not being funny, as we will go through, and as I have gone through in the last two videos, I have reason to doubt Rupert's side of the story. Now, that doesn't mean that his side of the story won't be vindicated. However, it does mean, from the facts that we can establish so far, I don't think anyone should really be 100% putting their flag in Rupert Lowe's side. And honestly, the reason I'm going through this video with Carl and Ben is because an awful lot is revealed here that gave me more pause for thought on the whole thing.
Indeed, he should be encouraging people who are better than him to join the party. That's what a proper leader would do.
I mean, it's worth noting at this point as well that he says people say he doesn't want to share the limelight. I mean, sure, these rallies end up with Farage having the biggest applause, the biggest speech, and he always is the finishing act. However, especially thinking back to the election, an awful lot of the time, he shared the stage with Richard Tice. Richard Tice was all over reform leafleting and all over reform publications. Richard Tice is quite clearly the person that he was sharing the limelight with, and that is probably because Richard Tice was managing to get the party in around the low to mid-teens for some years. Again, this is giving me high doubts that Farage is scared to share the limelight. That might be true in the past. At this point, though, I have my doubts on it.
And that's why I was arguing so vehemently for democratization. It wasn't to set Nigel out of the party, but it was to make sure that there were checks and balances and processes within the party that would enable the great minds of our movement to actually be heard by the leadership, and for your voice to be entertained, not dismissed.
Well, for a start, the party has been democratized. I did a whole video on it. It's actually the most democratic out of all the three main parties, i.e. Reform plus the Uniparty. So I'm fed up of hearing Ben say this, because this was in the works probably before he even left the party. And, I mean, the man is still bringing it up to this day. It's a problem I have with Ben Habib. He's a broken record and does not seem to actually be largely appreciating what is going on. And, in fact, every time Reform makes steps to democratise, professionalise, he always has something negative to say. I will say there was one exception where the specific details skipped my mind, but when it was clear that the new constitution that was a lot more democratised was actually going through for reform, he did actually finally say something along the lines of, oh, this is good to see, but he put it in the words of, this is great progress. Which again, he probably only did because there was absolutely no way he could criticise it properly without looking like a moron to the people that actually largely are sympathetic to his position. Anyway.
And if Nigel doesn't want to do it, and as was the case with Rupert, he didn't even meet Rupert. He didn't meet him for months. Rupert was pleading for a meeting, and Nigel wouldn't meet him.
So quite a few question marks are going up above the head of people who, one, have always been sceptical of Farage, but two, might not really understand why there could be good reasons for that outside of what Ben Habib has said, which is, oh, Lowe's getting too popular. Because I'm not going to lie to you, I don't think it's entirely true. It's certainly true in online spheres, there's no doubt about that. Hell, he was my favourite MP as well, as I keep saying. However, it does need to be established that when Rupert Lowe did that public interview with the Mail, and the phrase is going to come up, so I'm going to address it now, but the reasonable criticisms that involved, as I went through in the article and have said over the past two videos, was nothing but insulting and going directly against party brief. That indicates to me that that was his private issue with the party, and I'm not being funny, but if it's just a bleating of what Ben Habib has said for some time and all Ben Habib does is try to denigrate the party, why, when Nigel Farage is busy trying to build up and prioritise many other things that are actually going to help reform, would he bother listening to the same criticism that Ben Habib has been sending him daily anyway? Why didn't he meet Rupert for lunch for months? Probably because he may have already known what he was going to say, and he did not find the criticism useful. That is well within the bounds of possibility here. I don't know why people are only giving all their charity to Rupert Lowe. I don't think it's a good idea.
And inevitably, it was going to end up in a bust-up. So
it was pointed out by quite a few people for some time that there did seem to be some discrepancy between Reform's official stances and things that Rupert Lowe said. Hell, he was in interviews saying, thankfully you don't have to toe party line the whole time. But again, this is a very basic thing with electoral politics. Optics obviously matter. Everyone has seen now that clip of Nigel Farage saying that he doesn't want to get into mass deportations, and he says in the clip exactly what he means. He doesn't want to go into mass deportations because effectively it's a convoluting term, nobody really understands what it means, and if he says it, that's ammo for the mainstream media to attack him for months. And anytime he talks about deportation or immigration, it's something he's going to have to bring up and it'll obfuscate his point being made. And then obviously Rupert Lowe comes out and constantly says, oh, mass deportation, yeah, it's great. I think he's even mentioned remigration a few times. And again, it's against party lines because the party understands that optics matter. And using these frankly ill-defined terms that frankly, they will be well aware that people on the online right are using to mean a lot more than just remove illegal immigrants and remove foreign criminals. It ends up obfuscating the whole thing, and then they can't stay on message. I don't think Rupert Lowe has been pulled up about it in the mainstream media because I don't think, still, they really pay attention to the online world. However, it is a whole bunch of bear traps that have been set. Again, this is very basic political and electoral politics. You can't just be running your mouth off against the party. It doesn't make sense. It's worth noting at this point as well that Jeremy Corbyn, of all people, was out canvassing and holding the party line when Blair was in charge, before 1997 and beyond. Politics is a very slow game. You can't be high time preference here. It's very simple.
Nigel has completely shirked that. He says he's democratised the party. He hasn't. It's in his total control.
Yeah, again, as I say, I've been through an entire video going through what the actual democratisation process is for reform now. It's got through the Electoral Commission, I do believe, or at the very least it's been sent off to the Electoral Commission. And again, it was voted on at conference by the members that were present, pretty much unanimously, I would add. None of this has ever been good enough for Ben Habib, and nothing ever will be good enough for Ben Habib, because, as he will go into, he's got a grudge against Farage.
So Rupert was absolutely right to call Nigel out, and if you don't mind me saying so, so was I. And,
so was I.
You know, so were you.
I did the same thing.
Absolutely.
Again, this is something that I've been noticing for some time. An awful lot of consolidation has been going on over the past few days, in that, and I've gone through streams of this, I've gone through videos of this, people who have said, I am very sceptical of Nigel Farage, and put on this front of, oh, I'm just a critical friend, I'm just trying to criticise, I'm just trying to help Farage. All of a sudden, when this massive drama has been incurred, everyone scurries to defend Rupert Lowe to the hilt. And I get it insofar as he's a very good MP, as I constantly say, he is a very good MP. The problem is that being a very good MP only gets you so far when it comes to actually being good in government.
So people like you and me and others need to really drive this debate to its natural conclusion and make sure that we emerge from it with some kind of coherent voice for the colloquial right wing.
Well, I'm not being funny, but what Reform are pushing is quite clearly a coherent and unifying voice for the right wing. This is evidenced by the fact that in polls they're in the lead in an awful lot of them. On average, aggregate polling, they're in the lead yet again. The latest polls to come out after this Lowe issue has come about are all either neutral or positive for Reform. What I think's happening is that the online right are currently ignoring a reality check that they don't actually represent anyone out there in the electorate. So we can have these discussions with Ben, with Carl, with other Lotus Eaters, with, I don't know, AA, the people over at Pimlico Journal. We can have all these conversations on the online right, but I'm basically coming to the conclusion that the whole thing's just really a gossip club, whose influence is remarkably limited. You know, there's been talk that there could be another party that's going to rival Reform on the right, including Rupert Lowe, Ben Habib, with funding from Elon Musk. I say go for it, because I really do think that this is going to be the final reality check that a lot of people get into their heads. If they start saying it's all a psyop and the mainstream media were against us and the establishment killed it, I think you need to realise at that point that the online right is largely taken over by gin brains. On the other hand, I could be wrong and it could be the most successful thing in the world. I highly doubt it is, though.
I find myself drawing comparisons to different styles of politics, and I just find it bizarre that Nigel has chosen a very rigid and formalized and insecure form of politics.
Yes, well, that's a form of politics that wins elections, doesn't it? What did Boris Johnson do to win his landslide? Oh, yeah, get Brexit done. All the Wets who tried to stop it, we're going to ignore that nonsense now. Boom, 2019 landslide victory. What did Starmer do? Right, we're getting rid of all the anti-Semites and all the Navarro media types. You know, they're not putting their message forward anymore. The Corbyn era is over. Right, what ends up happening? Landslide victory. Theresa May's in there. She ends up in a coalition and weak government. What was her messaging? Weak and whimsical. Nobody really understood what it was. All the copes of strong and stable government nobody really believed because there was mixed messages absolutely everywhere. End of the day, you need a strong party line. If you're not following that party line, it's going to be difficult to stay on message and end up winning an election. Again, these are all basic electoral politics.
Fawning yes men are basically fundamentally flawed human beings. They don't have courage.
Again, on this point, you could say Boris Johnson was a yes man for years and then he ended up winning that election. Okay, not a great example because he ended up just falling into the leftist paradigm again. All right, fair enough. That wasn't actually happening before COVID, I would point out. However, a better example is probably Jeremy Corbyn yet again. He was a yes man for Labour for all those years until he managed to bring himself up to be leader and put forward his politics to the electorate and then lost twice. I would also point out to Theresa May. But the point being, this dyed-in-the-wool communist was being a yes man for a relatively, at least at the start, neoliberal government that then started to turn into a more Fabian side of things as time went on, so that eventually he could get student entryism into the party and then effectively rise up to leader. Politics is an incredibly slow game. You cannot have people with high time preference here. I'm afraid to say that we are listening to a conversation with people who have high time preference and do not understand that to actually get your aims into electoral politics, it takes years of being yes men. I'm afraid that's just the reality of it. You're not changing that by whinging at the sidelines.
Therapeutically, they're going to feel that they've done their bit. And Rupert couldn't even get close to Nigel.
To be a little bit defensive here, it's not necessarily that you have to be a yes man, it's that in public you have to seem like you are on the united front. Corbyn will have been at party conferences within Labour and privately put out his issues to the members of his issues of the current government. Anything public, though, he was stum. He was silent. He was saying my full support is with Tony Blair and the Labour Party. Now, to be fair to Rupert Lowe, he was doing that for quite a while. He then stopped doing that. And even after that, Nigel Farage said in an interview he hoped that Rupert Lowe would still be a Reform candidate next election, but given, as I've gone through, he's been acting very unprofessionally over the past week or so, I don't think that's going to happen anymore. Again, you can say that this is Nigel Farage being narcissistic, but at the end of the day, this is just standard party politics. He is no more narcissistic than anyone else in this case. And having good optics is what has led Farage to be as popular as he is. He does not go too extreme. The main thing he does is try to find topics that aren't too talked about, but he notices that there are misgivings from the general public about, let's say, and he ends up bringing them into the mainstream. People seem to forget that Nigel Farage was the first person making the report with GB News on the boat issue and then being set up in hotels. He was the first person to say that, and that something had to be dealt with. Anyone saying he doesn't want that dealt with is just moronic and wrong.
Nigel appointed himself leader on the 3rd of June, 2024. I was deputy leader. I was not forewarned about Nigel coming back as a leader.
Okay, that would largely be on Richard Tice then, wouldn't it?
Forget about having any discussion with him. I wasn't even told that he was coming back as leader. I discovered in that afternoon at the press conference that he was now leader. And throughout the general election, I didn't once speak to Nigel. In fact, I haven't once spoken to Nigel since he came back as leader.
Again, I'm not particularly shocked by this. The 3rd of June was a month before the general election. The man was incredibly busy going around to rallies, to speeches, to media interviews, to, actually have the election be somewhat of a success. Again, there's this whole narrative that Nigel Farage is avoiding criticism. What's actually a lot more likely here is that Nigel Farage is prioritising supporting the party, building the party, professionalising the party, and creating a mass movement that gets an awful lot of votes and gets into government. I'm sorry, but frankly, he probably doesn't have that much time for internal criticism at that point in time.
We've had some text, some of which have been frankly abusive from him, and there's been no correspondence. So I knew straight away when he came back that things were going to be problematic.
I do find it quite funny because, for months it has just been a victim narrative from Ben. I'm sorry, but this is the reality of politics. You're not going to have time for these seriously, what's Ben going to say here? Oh, I disagree that you've come back as leader. Okay. Anyway, back to these speeches, back to these rallies, back to getting these votes, eh? Honestly, it should not be a surprise to anyone that the honorary president of Reform UK, who was honorary president because he has been a successful political leader in the past, manages to be appointed as the leader again. It's really not that surprising.
Nigel and I are ideologically at odds. And we have been ideologically at odds for a long, long time.
Which is, probably another reason that he couldn't be bothered. I would imagine that Nigel Farage already knows how you are ideologically at odds. What is the point of hearing it yet again? This is the point I'm trying to make. Oh, he should listen to criticism more. The problem is, he already knows what the criticism is, because it's obviously been put to him before, and the man has 1,000,001 other better things to do than hear the criticism again. I'm not saying criticism is bad, I'm saying the criticism has to be good and not just a repeat of what previous criticism was, otherwise you're obviously not going to get heard. Yes, we have heard you before, we've not changed so far, we're not going to change this time either. See you later. Honestly.
And if I had known that Nigel was coming back into lead Reform, I would never have joined Reform.
It's hilarious how mask-off Ben has been and doesn't actually realise how damaging this is to the whole Lowe camp. Habib has been Lowe's biggest supporter since he has left the party, mainly I think because Lowe has been parroting Habib's own criticism, and again, I don't think that's gone unnoticed by the party. However, to come out and say if I knew there was any chance of Nigel Farage coming back to lead, which I don't know why you wouldn't think there is a chance of that, a lot of people joined Reform at the time, including me, on the off chance he actually would come back because he was clearly campaigning for them. And then even when he did join, you didn't leave anyway. I imagine that was because, frankly, you wanted to use his name to try and become an MP. Because it's no surprise to anyone that Farage is a magnet for popularity for those that are fed up with the Uniparty. The man basically embodies that whole movement, and I think it's stupid for anyone to try and dismiss that point. Oh, someone else can definitely do it. No, I'm afraid not. Nigel Farage is actually a man who has been the face of the anti-establishment for a decade. That is free publicity you cannot get rid of, and he's still willing to work to overthrow the establishment and the Uniparty. So, if you're leaving it, I don't think that's a good idea.
I had the firm impression that Nigel wanted to make money. In fact, he's not on firm impression. He told me that. I had dinner with him in 2020.
He goes on to expand the anecdote. We don't need to hear it. We get it. Farage wanted to make money. And again, people, I don't know why people are forgetting this, but Farage, again, was still on that train. He was part of GB News. He had a load of other jobs where he was getting a lot of money and making a lot of money. And he didn't want to go back into politics because he actually felt that his time was up and that he wanted effectively to be a retired politician giving commentary on GB News with his own show. The reason he went back is because whenever he was canvassing for reform at events and things like that, something he was asked every time by members of the public who supported reform was, why don't you come back and get into politics? I'd really like to see you in the House of Commons, etc, etc, etc. And he made it clear in multiple statements, multiple interviews, that this was the reason he went back, because there was popular support for it, and he didn't want to let people down by not being a more direct part of the movement. And obviously Richard Tice says, yeah, sure, you can be a candidate. Yeah, sure, you can be leader as well. That makes sense. You are by far the most popular person. And you're obviously going to be an asset to reform. There's basically no downsides to this. And Ben Habib still whinges about it. Why? Ideological differences. He doesn't want to toe his, as in Farage's party line. And he's made that quite clear since leaving. And internally, that will be an absolute pain for Farage. But he didn't say anything about that publicly. He waited until Ben attacked first. Again, not quite the character of a narcissist.
Brexit's not done. We need you back in the field. We need you fighting to get a proper Brexit.
It's largely what my issue with Ben's ideological positions are. They're just... There's no popular support to really talk about Brexit anymore. It's all about, as Matt Goodwin constantly tells us, it's all about immigration, it's all about the cost of living crisis, and also crime and feeling safe in the country is another issue that a lot of people bring up a lot of the time. Those are what we need to focus on. That is what reform has largely been focused on. Ben Habib wants to basically keep talking about Brexit. Again, if they're going to make this new party and they keep talking about Brexit, it's not going to get very far.
And so for him now, in the year of our Lord 2025, to do it to Rupert Lowe, who appears to be almost kind of comically good in a way, as in, like, I went through this on the podcast today. The BBC went to Great Yarmouth and interviewed people on the street. And the worst anyone could say about him was, well, he's not actually from here. Otherwise, he's brilliant. He's donating his wages to charity. He is actually fixing local concerns. Quote, he is the best MP Great Yarmouth has ever had.
Yeah, I mean, these are all fair points, apart from the charity one. The issue I have with the charity one is that the only reason Rupert Lowe is actually able to do that is obviously because he is a huge businessman who's obviously able to live off the multiple businesses he has running, which, you know, he's a successful businessman, fine. Sure, the other Reform MPs could do that, but at the end of the day, I'm not being funny, but there's a reason in the Bible why Jesus effectively told us to not shout out our virtues like this. You know, virtue signaling's bad, if you know what I mean. And there is every chance that the other businessmen MPs currently sitting in Parliament are giving equivalent to their parliamentary wage to charity every year. We don't know. We don't know because they don't shout it out like Rupert Lowe does. So I think basically it's a moot point. It's not bad. I'm not saying it's bad, but it is effectively a moot point. However, it is a point that I need to get across. When it comes to parliamentary politics, being an excellent MP is all well and good. But the fact of the matter is that Rupert can do what he's doing as an independent MP. You also need to be part of the party, because at the end of the day, the party is going to end up in government and it's going to need to be a coherent team and a good team to actually move forward and do what it needs to do for the country. It's been quite clear to me that, you know, there's always the excuse that, oh, he's just reacting to being treated unfairly. Well, as I've gone through many videos and as I'm going through now, Ben Habib quite openly is on Rupert Lowe's side because, as he says, he had contact with Rupert Lowe, and he doesn't go into it yet, but I went through it yesterday. He even sent a text on the 28th effectively telling Rupert Lowe, resign and start crafting a narrative. That's effectively what he told him to do. Now, he didn't resign, however, he did craft a narrative. And it's a narrative, as I went through yesterday, that I think we should not be taking at face value. Not necessarily that it's all false, but it certainly is confusing, and we have had confirmed false statements within the narrative. So, you know, treat it with skepticism.
And all of the other character witnesses who have come out and said, well, I've known Rupert Lowe for 45 years. He's a giant teddy bear. He's been nothing but kind and chivalrous to everyone around him. Do you think he may have picked the wrong fight here?
It is something that is never mentioned at all by anyone on Rupert Lowe's side. They cannot address the fact that a KC came out and said Rupert Lowe has made false statements about me, and I have to correct the record. Nobody is addressing that, at least independently. I was on Twitter yesterday asking Carl why he didn't mention it in another one of his videos where he's giving Rupert Lowe this gleaming character assessment, and I point out, hang on, why haven't you put this pretty glaringly negative thing in? And here's what he said. Apparently it's not germane to the point, or relevant to the point, as you well know. Which, you know, when you are making a character assessment of someone, it is actually pretty important to point out that we have pretty much conclusive evidence that he has been misleading us. That's pretty important to the character assessment, that he will mislead people. It brings into question his credibility and thereby his whole narrative. Does that not bother you? To which Carl says, you know this isn't germane to the point, relevant to the point, and also she's probably just covering her arse given how Farage is her employer. Don't get tiresome. I'm sorry, but it's a point I have to make again as I made yesterday. KCs have an entire rule book that they have to work by to effectively keep their qualifications. You know, this woman will have the bar as she's a KC. If you make false public statements, there's a whole rule book on public statements, and one of the big ones is if you lie, you can go to a disciplinary hearing and lose the bar. Hereby she loses her livelihood. I'm sorry, I am simply not going to buy that a KC who does not have issues finding cases to work on, by the way, it's not like it is an out-of-demand job, hence they cost so much, is going to cover Farage's arse, as Carl puts it, and risk her entirely livelihood on that. There is absolutely... I would highly doubt there is any KC that would do that. And in fact, I have a friend who's currently working towards getting his bar, and one of the actual rules is if any KC has any reason to believe that this is a lie with evidence, then it is actually a lawful duty to actually report her to the bar. Thereby we can conclude that it is an incredibly credible statement. Probably the most credible statement made by anyone in this entire ordeal. I mean, the man is trusting an anonymous source from Sky, by the way, but won't trust the actual KC. And so from there, I can only conclude that this is mostly propaganda pieces, rather than actually trying to do, as frankly I'm trying to do, which is look at all this through an unbiased lens. And the reason I'm going through all this is to basically say, listen, we basically have, from the horse's mouth, people showing their biases. I think we should take a step back and start trying to look this from a different angle, because doing it, frankly, through Carl, Ben Habib, a lot of people on the online right as well, I don't think we're getting a very good picture here, and I think that is going to end up with a lot of people with egg on their face. Frankly, I'm not saying that Farage is definitely right, I'm not saying that Lowe is definitely guilty of anything he's been alleged to have done. What I am saying is that we don't have many facts, and we should probably keep bearing that in mind, rather than going ahead and saying stupid things like this, where you're effectively saying that... By saying this, by the way, Carl, you are saying that this Casey should lose her job. And I don't think you've quite realised that that's what you've actually said here. And so if we're starting to make statements like that, perhaps we're a bit too deep in a rabbit hole.
And it's not that he's sought to destroy his reputation, which is the normal playbook. He's actually sought to destroy Rupert Lowe. You know, however frivolous the complaint to the police, the aim of a complaint to the police is to get someone incarcerated.
Yeah, this is something that Gawain Towell has said, to be fair, on this whole affair. He cannot make heads or tails of Zaya reporting the threats against Zaya to the police. Gawain effectively said, I suppose that the hurty word must have been exceptionally hurty. And we have no details on what any of these allegations actually are. I believe the rumour on the Dan Wootton show was... There was a rumour that he said he'd slit Zaya's throat. The retort was, I said that we'd be slitting the throat of the party. It's all he said, she said stuff. Like, this is a particular point we don't really have any conclusive evidence on. The thing is, as Rupert Lowe has been saying an awful lot on Twitter, and this is what I do take him at his word for, he's been getting his solicitors together effectively to, I think, try and get a libel case together and effectively countersue for the threat made against him, because he does have the Met Police on him, and he has had to lawyer up for it. And so there might be some damages he can claim for having false allegations put against him. Fair enough, he's obviously going to fight that corner. But this is the thing, you know, everyone involved here, they're not particularly stupid people. Zaya's going to know that if he does this, there's going to be a reaction from Rupert Lowe like this, because that's what Rupert Lowe does quite a lot. He's on Twitter quite a lot saying, I'm going to sue you for saying this. He's doing it to Femi Sorry right now, for example. And making allegations like this from the chairman will bring nothing but disrepute to the party. And again, I'm not saying that this necessarily means that he has given credible and true allegations. What I am saying is that it is unlikely he's lied. However, there is every chance he has. Again, let's try and look through this in an unbiased lens. What I'm supposed to believe is that these two people, Nigel Farage and Zaya Yousaf, and the rest of Reform actually, have put in an awful lot of money, time and effort to try and build this party up and get it to the top of the polls, only for them to risk all of that to try and get rid of an MP that is incredibly popular and getting more popular than Nigel Farage. I'm sorry, that is not a story that I'm going to buy. If it turns out that's true, then fine. All these people who have built nothing after getting kicked out of any of Farage's projects or leaving of their own volition are all correct, and then in that case it turns out that you need to be a really narcissistic menace to get anywhere in politics, which might be blackpilling, but that's the case. Also, if it turns out they've lied about Rupert Lowe, fine, I will leave the Reform Party and I will effectively apologise to all these people that I've doubted. I don't think that's a likely scenario, though.
There was perhaps a very short opportunity during which Nigel could have sacked their Yousaf and said, I do not endorse your criminal complaint. By all means, make it, but you do it on your own. But he didn't do it. He doubled down and he supported their Yousaf. And I think it makes, I'm moving on here, but I think it makes any form of reconciliation impossible.
I mean, Rupert Lowe made any sort of reconciliation impossible after he went off like that on Twitter, which again, if he's been lied about, all right, makes sense, probably fair enough. I still think it's fairly unprofessional and he shouldn't be acting like that. However, once again, in all of this retort that he's put on Twitter, as I said yesterday, he can't exactly keep the story straight. So again, trying my best to look at this through an unbiased lens, I think that there is more credibility to Reform side of this argument than Rupert Lowe's. And anyone defending either side to the hilt, I'm not defending Reform to the hilt, I'm still saying, yeah, this whole thing with the accusations of threat, that is a bit of a square that I'm still struggling to actually fit anywhere. However, we can't make any conclusions until the investigations are completed. But here we are having an entire conversation with a rather large audience, effectively doing what, assuming this is all nonsense by the way, assuming that Reform get vindicated, but there's every chance that they have just smeared Nigel Farage for half an hour here. I'm willing to take an awful lot of people at their word, but like in a court of law, you can't take witness testimonies as gospel, because there's an awful lot of reasons people will either misremember things, outright lie, or omit parts of the story. And a big problem we're having at the moment is that we're only hearing one side of the story. Everyone's taking that side of the story at its word, and I think even with that side of the story, there's reasons to be sceptical about it. And then there are things happening on the other side that we can quite easily make a fairly defensible narrative of that nobody is doing. And I really think that we're going to end up having a lot of people with egg on their face. And I'm having doubts that it's going to be me.
Yeah, so-called allegations, because actually the allegations, there weren't any real allegations. There's no allegation of bullying against Rupert. That's against other people. It just happened to happen in Rupert's office.
Again, I've gone through it plenty of times in other videos. That has been established from the very start. I don't know why people are still trying to say that anyone is accusing Rupert Lowe of bullying. That wasn't even in the original Reform statement. Yes, it was. You could at best say the original statement from Reform was ambiguous. However, it was clarified by an awful lot of people in Reform on the same day, and Rupert Lowe even acknowledged that. And yet every time there's a new claim that, Rupert Lowe isn't being accused of bullying, all of a sudden what we're being told then is that, from Rupert Lowe once again saying, no, I'm not a bully. Yeah, we know. We've known that since Friday. I don't this is the inconsistency I'm talking about. He's already established he's not a bully, and instead of saying, again, it's being confirmed, he's saying, everyone's calling me a bully, but actually it's nothing to do with me bullying people. As if that wasn't already established. It makes me highly sceptical, as I say.
He threatened their Yousaf apparently with physical violence, verbally threatened him with physical violence. Well, isn't Reform the singular entity that bangs on about people being slightly more stiff upper lip when it comes to being offended with words.
I'm kind of getting bored of this whole argument that a 67-year-old man can't make credible threats for a few reasons. One, it's not like men in their 60s can't throw a punch. Obviously, he can throw a punch. Two, it's not like he can't get weaponry. Now, obviously, we're going into weeds of things that are unlikely to happen. The thing is that if we're talking realistically about this, what we're really saying is, oh, well, I have high doubts that Rupert Lowe wouldn't actually attack anyone. And yes, I have my doubts too, but the fact of the matter is, if you are threatened by someone twice, and there is reason to believe that they probably could act upon it, it's not actually unreasonable to go to the police. Now, again, as I keep saying, this is the most sceptical part of the story for reform. I'm totally on that side of things. I don't really know how to square this circle properly. However, I don't think it's a particularly good refutation to say, oh, a 67-year-old man could not do any harm to a 30-odd-year-old man, when that has literally happened in the past. We've seen 60-odd-year-old men kill 30-odd-year-old men before, or harm them. Not necessarily directly. They could get other people to do the dirty work for them. And again, I think it's highly unlikely that Rupert Lowe would be the type of person to get people to do dirty work like that for him, ever. What I am saying is that age alone is not reason enough to dismiss these out of hand. It's reason to be sceptical of them, totally on that side of things, but we're going beyond that here.
And to make the complaint 3 months after it happened.
This is another point. It's been said by Farage and Tice, and again, they could be lying on this, fine, but it has basically been put forward that the first threat was made back in December, and the second threat was made over the past week, I think they were usually saying. And according to the police investigation, or at least the press release of the police investigation, they are looking into incidents where this has happened between December and February of this year. So it's clearly not stuff that's... Well, one of the threats was months ago, obviously. The other threat has been in the past couple of weeks. Again, it's another issue I have with this entire conversation from the online right. They keep getting details of this all wrong, and it doesn't really bode well for making good analysis on the whole situation. It's my main problem here.
The application, the complaint, rather, filed with the police happened the day after the whole thing blew up.
Yeah, I mentioned this earlier in the video as well. It's quite clear to me that they were trying to keep an awful lot of this under wraps. And we don't know exactly when the threat to Zaya Yusuf was made, but it sounds from the police anyway that it happened in February. Now, that could be February 28th for all we know. And so, yes, they clearly didn't go public with any of this until after that interview with the Mail came out. Now, okay, that looks like a political attack. Honestly, probably is to some extent. But what choice really do they have, and why should they keep trying to keep this under wraps when Rupert Lowe then goes out and attacks them publicly? Again, privately it probably would be okay. But I'm sorry, as I went through with the Corbyn example, that man managed to keep his mouth shut about all the issues he had with the neoliberal New Labour Blair governments and work his way up. Politics is a very long game. And here we are seeing people who don't understand that. But the reality of the situation is that, once again, by law, if they have complaints of bullying sent to them, and the letters came last Tuesday, it is up to them to actually act on this. And also, if the threats on Zaya Yusuf are credible as well, they actually have a duty of care to him as well. By law, they have to report them. Now, why is the one from 3 months ago being brought up as well as the most recent one? They might have not thought it was credible back then. The man does it twice, second time round, probably could be worse, who knows? They report it. Again, I'm giving you a reason as to why this might have happened that is away from the online right narrative that we're seeing at the moment. We won't know anything for sure until this is all over. Again, planting your flag on either side is probably a bad idea. As I say, I'm leaning more towards finding Reform's side a little bit more credible, and I think it's in everyone's interest to try and maybe drag the conversation more to that way, or at the very least stop thinking that everything Lowe says is gospel.
As did these bullying things. There's no cause and effect between the threats of physical violence and a complaint to the police. The cause and effect is between Rupert outshining Nigel, Nigel wishing to set Rupert aside, Rupert speaking up, and then being absolutely nailed.
Yeah, again, another funny point on this is it was on the 28th yet again that Ben Habib sent that text effectively telling him to craft a narrative from that point. And we don't actually know the context of the rest of that conversation. We don't know what Rupert Lowe said to him, and we don't know what was said before that. But that's kind of by the by anyway. Obviously, there's claims that the Daily Mail interview was done before the letters of complaint were sent through. That is claimed by both Rupert Lowe and the interviewer who did it. But then obviously it was sat on for over a week, which, again, I'm not too into the whole understanding how political journalism works. However, I've never really known for interviews like that to be held onto for over a week. But again, if Rupert Lowe is acting and saying what he was saying in that interview within the party, when frankly they are all trying to professionalise the party, trying to network, trying to get donors, trying to get candidates, trying to vet, trying to see who their pool of people is to pick cabinet members from. It's kind of annoying when you've got a guy there who's saying, please do all that, but quicker, please. And then goes to the public and basically says the party isn't serious. Again, there's perfectly credible reasons to think that this could be a political attack. However, at the same time, as I say, if these allegations are credible, they actually also have a duty of care to their employers, and there is actually no reason whatsoever they shouldn't have reported him to have investigations be put upon him and to the police. That's all I'm saying. And again, we can't know for sure which side is correct until the investigation's over. Like most things, it's probably somewhere in the middle.
And by the way, I've seen that playbook used dozens and dozens of times by Zia Yusuf and Nigel across the country to set aside good former grassroots members of Reform who've stood shoulder to shoulder with me in various elections and others, campaigning for Reform, putting Reform on the map, and they have been summarily dismissed with their reputations tarnished. Many, many people, I won't start naming names because otherwise I would have to, I might forget someone.
I'm sorry, I just let that whole thing play out because I have high doubts about this. I'm sorry, but you're not seeing grassroots people that Ben knows being retweeted by Ben with them claiming, oh, Zia Yusuf and Nigel Farage have ruined my reputation. Are you telling me that wouldn't be on Twitter? Are you telling me that this would not be shared about? Are you telling me that this is not the perfect thing to try and prove to everyone is actually true? This is the point where I think it's pretty obvious that Ben is probably fibbing to some extent. People have been lied about in the country and things like that. Hell, even when those 12 Reform councillors, I can't remember exactly where they were, but when they all defected as well, at no point did they say they've been smeared. At no point did they say they were going to get kicked out by Zia Yusuf and all that. They mainly said they just weren't parallel with the party. So even these people who defected to Reform and then defected away, they're not even trying to claim that they were smeared by central office. So I'm seeing absolutely no evidence for this. I'm having to trust Ben at his word. And then he starts saying, oh, I can't actually name anyone because his reason was I can't forget people. I'm sorry, I don't buy that. You can give one or two examples. We can actually see what happened there. But no, he's hiding behind, oh, I'm going to keep them anonymous, though. Sorry, I'm dismissing that out of hand. There is absolutely no evidence whatsoever that what Ben Habib claims here is true. Is it pushed back on? Oh, let's see.
We'll be here all day as well.
Yeah, I'd be here all day. It's absolutely...
No, of course, just goes along with it. Something has been said there that we need evidence for. There is no evidence for it whatsoever, and we just have to trust Ben at his word. I'm sorry, I'm not doing that for this case. We're not quite at the point yet, but Ben Habib just openly says, it basically says that he's had a grudge for Farage for some time. He openly says that in this interview, and I'm sorry, but I have more reason to believe that that is a smear against Farage and Zia than it is anywhere close to the truth. Honestly, there are people who are leaving Reform right now, and not even they are claiming that they've been smeared by central office. There's no evidence for this whatsoever. It should be called out for the nonsense it is, and it's not. And that does not bode well for Carl's reputation as a journalist.
I could see what was happening, Carl, with Rupert. So I wrote to Rupert, and I'm so glad I did. I sent him a text on the morning of the 28th of February, before any complaint was made by Reform against Rupert.
Hang on a minute. Once again, there's stuff here that it's very possible that it was omitted. The timeline here is important. Here's the actual image of the text, by the way. You'll notice that it is technically morning by an entire 60 seconds. So I believe, again, I'm very sceptical of Ben Habib for a number of reasons. Well, because I've seen him been lying for months, but I would argue it's more accurate to call this midday than morning, but I think he's trying to say it's earlier in the day to try and put away any ideas that Rupert Lowe had told him about the letters. But as I say again, this is clear, direct as I said yesterday as well, clear direct Ben Habib influence on Rupert Lowe. My question would then be, how long have you actually been throwing this influence on him? This does not look like the first text you would send someone about this issue. This looks like you've been talking about this for weeks, if not months. This is kind of the end point of conversations you two have been having about Rupert's place in reform, and here is you effectively saying, take the gloves off and fight back before they can start crafting any narrative against you, which, this tends to be what happens in political dramas. But what I am saying here is that it's been very clear to me that Rupert Lowe has been influenced by Ben Habib for some time here, or at least I suspect it quite strongly. And given that the public statements he did make about reform were just bleating of Ben Habib's criticisms, it's basically led me to believe that Rupert Lowe was Ben Habib's envoy within the party, and I think that didn't go unnoticed by the party, and I think they basically got fed up with it, and were basically given carte blanche to actually do something about it when they were given the letters on Friday. Now again, if they're nonsense or if they're true, we don't particularly know. What we do know is that by law, they have to deal with it. Otherwise, they are liable to an unlimited fine that could directly kill the party.
And that for me, puts reform into an unreformable category. Nigel has to go.
Well,
Yusuf has to go.
Yeah, the top of the polls, and we just had another poll out today that was actually polling from the 7th to, was either 10th or 11th of March, i.e. after all this low stuff came out, reform still went up by a percentage point. It's not happening. It's not happening. Make your new party, join the Tories, doesn't really matter. As far as I'm concerned, you've probably lost this whole thing. I think as we go down the line and the investigations conclude, if they have directly lied about him, I will leave reform, I will resign from them, I can't trust them, totally fair. Then you may be able to get back in, but saying it now is a little bit mad. Reform are as popular as they've ever been, and you are trying your best. You're trying your best to try and undermine them even more. Just people aren't going to stand for it. Just give up at this point, it's over. Try and play a bit more long term. They're just incapable of doing that.
And so I think people are asking for some kind of big tent right-wing politics where we can just literally take everyone, because there are dozens of totally wasted commentators, political pundits, thinkers, academics, people with civil servants, ex-politicians, current politicians who are currently homeless and don't want to put their lives in Nigel Farage's hands.
Well, more fool them, isn't it? I'm not being funny, but I'm going to have to use the Jeremy Corbyn and Owen Jones example again. They were campaigning for Labour forever. For decades, in fact. Jeremy Corbyn became leader in his 60s or something like that, and he'd been a Labour member since he was like 10. That's how long it can take to try and actually finally get the world you want put forward to the electorate. I'm sorry, but that's just the case. Same with Margaret Thatcher. Her plan was completely different to those of Ted Heath's, but did she openly come out to public and complain about it? No, she didn't. Kept her head down, did the work for the party, and earned her place into the spot as leader. And I'm sorry, if that in this case means that you just have to keep your head down and follow as Nigel Farage says, so be it. It's not actually that difficult. And then eventually you will have a successor to Farage when he does finally either die or retire from politics entirely. Hopefully it's the latter. And then the legacy of reform will continue from there, assuming all goes swimmingly well here. Getting this out of the way early is probably a blessing in disguise for reform, and as I mentioned in the polls, it looks like people are having a short-term dissatisfaction with Farage. However, the voting intention is showing that there's not particularly enough to affect the polls, so we'll have to see how it all goes.
Honestly, just the constant refrain is, well, Nigel Farage is the only game in town. It's like, okay, well, in a way they're correct. Yeah. Right, he is at the moment, because we let him be the only game in town. Because we don't want to split the vote. We don't want to do this. Well, he's already splitting the Conservative vote. And he already delivered us Keir Starmer. So, we may as well contest for it, I would say.
It is laughable that anyone in the Lotus Eaters would be saying that when two of you were candidates. Yes, fair enough, you got kicked out. But everyone else was clearly saying, yep, let's vote reform this time around, to the point you were kicked out of the Conservative Party. Do not give me this nonsense that Keir Starmer was delivered via Nigel Farage splitting the vote. That is a complete Tory talking point that you have now pivoted to. I cannot believe you have said this. This has been my issue for quite some time. An awful lot of political commentary from all over the spectrum is vibes-based. It does not try and do what I do my best to try and achieve, which is actually get all the facts together and then make my case. No, this is completely vibes-based. Carl does not believe this. Carl has never believed it. He is saying it because it is now politically expedient to say it, because it is a direct attack on Nigel Farage. And I do not understand why saying, oh, don't split the vote because it delivers us Starmer, is in any way a point to then say, oh, we need to split it even further to try and contest Nigel Farage's, frankly, domination of centre-right to right-wing politics. It's not going to happen. It's not going to work. And it is absolutely absurd that you would say, Nigel Farage split the vote. That was a bad idea. Tell you what, I'll split the vote further. Absolute absurdity. This is one of the most disappointing statements I think I've ever heard from Carl, and I'm still in shock that he said this. This was so bad I had to clip it for Twitter, because I just couldn't believe a man who was posting 0 seats for the month before the election would now come out and effectively say this without any sort of reflection on the fact that he was fully for this. 0 seats was actually it was AA's idea, but you were supporting it, Carl. I have absolutely no doubts that Nigel Farage will have been on board with it, but I'm not being funny. There's a reason that he probably avoids you and the Lotus Eaters, and it's something that we saw, unfortunately, from the whole Liz Truss debacle, which, again, I was defending the Lotus Eaters on that, and I will defend that we should not live in a world where they have a smear campaign against them, but at the end of the day, if we're in a world where they are, I'm sorry, but nobody trying to get into the mainstream is going to touch you with a 10-foot barge pole. You're just that toxic. And I understand that a lot of your more edgy content is just a joke and things like that, but at the end of the day, the mainstream isn't buying it. You're not going to get anywhere with that, I'm afraid. And I've said this in videos before, but there are clips that I have seen and gone through where, effectively, yeah, I'm going to have trouble defending you in the future. And we're kind of at the point where I'm going to have trouble defending you now. People like Liz Truss will probably go on because largely she's kind of a political irrelevancy. She's joked about constantly. I think that's completely unfair and a result of being smeared. Doesn't matter. It's the reality of the world. And when you're doing politics, you have to deal with the reality of the world. We don't live in utopia. We're never going to. We should stop kidding ourselves about it and try and do what we can in the real world with the power that we have. And the most power we have is within reform. So, as much as you might not like it, it's clearly a step in the direction we want.
And I think politically, what he's got really wrong, what he's really misunderstood, everyone says he's a great political tactician. What he's totally misunderstood is that the 2024 election actually was a thumping majority for the right wing.
I'm sorry, what do you mean, yes? The only blatantly right-wing party, because I'm telling you, the Tories were not considered right-wing by any of us at the time. The only right-wing party was Reform. Yes, right-wing people will be voting Tories, sure, that's fair enough, but as we constantly say, it's a broad church and there's people who basically may as well be Lib Dems voting for them. But we can guarantee that Reform were definitely a concrete right-wing vote, and they got, 14%, something like that? You can maybe say then the Tory vote was also part of that. In terms of percentages, it was 24 and 14, you're talking about 38%. I'm sorry, that is not thumping by any stretch of the imagination. You put all of the left-wing parties together, Labour, Lib Dems, SNP, all that, it comes out higher. We're talking like 45% or something like that. It's absurd to say. So what is your reasoning for this, Ben?
But actually, if you took the 4.5 million people who didn't vote and you add them to the votes that the Conservatives and Reform got, it was a thumping right-wing victory.
What an unbelievable statement. If you count everyone who didn't vote for the right-wing party, or the one that the entire mainstream media says is right-wing, then actually it was a thumping right-wing majority. What in God's name are you talking about? Yes, people have indeed not voted because they are disillusioned with the whole thing. Left-wingers are disillusioned too. There are plenty of left-wingers I know who didn't vote because they thought that Labour were going right-wing. Those that did vote voted Green. So I'm sorry, but from my personal anecdotes alone, you cannot count every single person there as right-wing. I would go as far as to say you probably couldn't even assume the majority are right-wing. Most of those people will just be apathetic. Maybe half. A quarter probably left-wing, a quarter probably right-wing. What a ridiculous statement by Ben Habib. What a ridiculous situation that Carl is not pushing back on it at all. This is an unbelievable discussion. And again, as I said before, completely vibes based.
And the next election is not going to be won in the centre ground, which is where Nigel is hurriedly going. The next election is going to be won by a party that is unashamedly pro-British and has policies that are actually dramatic in the impact that they will have in restoring the country. Anything less isn't going to work.
I'm sorry, but all I need to do is point to the polls. Yes, he's got mainstream appeal. Yes, he's moderating the message compared to what you would like him to say. It's actually no more moderate than what he was saying during the election, what's in the contract. This is a point that I don't know why a lot of people aren't appreciating. He's not moderated. I've done plenty of videos on it. The rhetoric might not be as firebrand as it was, sure, but the policies at their core are still the same. The whole point being put forward by reform is still the same. The idea that they are not unashamedly pro-British and right-wing is absurd. It's completely vibes-based. He's not quite doing exactly what I'd like him to be doing, which is being more firebrand and talking about mass deportations and talking about demographics. And then all of a sudden, oh, he must have cooked. I'm sorry, it's just nonsense. It's total nonsense. The points Reform have been making are largely the same. They've been doing the networking, doing the nice pictures with grannies in care homes and what have you. You know, the public lapped that up. And as I kept saying in the other video the other day, you know, in some polls they're pushing 30%. You know, on aggregate they're at 26%, which is above Labour, by the way. I'm just not buying any of this.
And Nigel ain't the man, because he's tacking right to the middle. I mean, one of the differences between him and Rupert is over the mass deportation of illegal migrants. What can be wrong with that as a policy?
Nothing. The problem is the rhetoric. You are opening a door here to the MSM to attack you. Oh, you say you want mass deportations. What exactly do you mean by that, Mr. Lowe? Oh, I mean deportation of illegals and criminals. That's all I mean. Oh, what was wrong with saying that in the first place? Oh, you sure you don't mean that you want British nationals to have their citizenship revoked and deported, even if they're not dual nationals? You know, that question's got to come up all the time. We are a law-abiding people. At this point, obviously, to our detriment. But that is still largely the British attitude, to do things within the law. And if you start deporting British nationals, or even insinuating that you could, as I'm not being funny, the vague term mass deportations, obviously it's vague to people outside of these X-bubbles, outside of these online circles. Obviously that's going to come up all the time. Why open the door to that if you're basically just saying the same thing that they're saying anyway? It's absolutely nuts that they don't understand that the optics game actually massively matters.
Nigel doesn't want to do it.
This is crazy, actually, because even leaning left outlets like YouGov, when they poll, find that 2/3 of the public want deportations of illegal immigrants. This is completely uncontroversial.
There's a reason that my community has made this meme for me. It's because I bring it up all the damn time. I am fed up with people telling me that there is going to be some sort of amnesty for illegals, or that it doesn't say that illegals are going to be deported. I'm sorry, what is an illegal immigrant if not a criminal? What does the Reform contract say? Deport all criminals. Why would they bother only deporting the criminals and the illegals that have come over on boats since they got into government? What sense does that make? It is the most uncharitable and not even remotely true interpretation of this page of the contract that I've ever seen in my life. And not only that, Nigel Farage himself has been quite clear that being illegal means you can't stay here.
Well, if people come illegally, they should not be allowed to stay. Simple as. Simple as.
It is not difficult to understand all this, but frankly, for some reason it's popular on the online right for months at this point to smear Nigel Farage and Reform like this. It's absurd. It has to stop. And I'm close to radicalised to thinking that a lot of the online right are incentivised actually to keep being losers. Why is that? Because it's a pretty good money maker. You can't accuse that of me. I barely make any money doing this. I do this as a hobby. I actually want things to change. That's why I've joined Reform, that's why I joined their meetings, and that's why I'm going to be canvassing in Runcorn, to actually do something useful and get Reform elected. Because, as I say, what other choice do you have? Oh, we'll spend another 5 years trying to make a new party. Great. Incredible. Thanks for that. Wonder if it's going to go any better than UKIP.
And so for Nigel Farage to row back and say, I never said I was anti-migration, I don't want mass deportations, I don't want these things. It's like, okay, but this is a very peculiar retreat from the most obviously correct political win and easiest political win, why is he backing down from this?
Because you're not listening to what he's saying there. When he says he's not an anti-migration party, he is not saying, I want all migrants out of the country. That is what he is saying there. When he's saying he doesn't want mass deportations, what he is saying there is that I understand the term is vague and can include British nationals who maybe are of foreign origin. You know, British nationals who have earned citizenship. Yeah, granted, an awful lot of people who've earned citizenship absolutely should not have it. Absolutely fair. Is that the same as saying, I want to deport all illegal immigrants? No, obviously it isn't. You work your way up these things. Why do you deport all criminals, rapists, violent people first? Because then that sets the boundary up for, listen, we can actually now deport tens of thousands of people per month. You can then ramp that up, open it up to further appetite for further deportations. You know, when people understand that you're not going to abuse the power of your deportations and they trust you're not going to abuse the power of it, they'll vote for you. That's what's trying to happen here. You're trying to do the opposite route of using these vague terms that sound like you could go gung-ho on the whole thing. It's not attractive to voters. I don't understand how this is so difficult to understand.
And Nigel has to go. You can't support Zia Youssef, who's reported Rupert to the police, wrongly reported Rupert to the police, and then continue to hold your position. It's a resignation matter.
Sorry, but again, Ben's going a bit mask off. He's wanted Nigel out for quite some time, and he goes into it here, but before we properly get into what I want to respond here, you can't actually conclusively say that Zia has wrongly accused Rupert yet. This is what I keep saying. He might have. He very well might have. We've got absolutely no conclusive evidence to say that, though, and I think it's foolish to allow that to be said without challenge yet again. But ultimately, Carl's on the side of, yeah, I believe Zia's falsely accused him. And it's not good journalism. It's not good.
As we all know, Nigel Farage wasn't even on the political battlefield when reform was being established. It was established with him absent. On the eve of the general election, we were polling at 16%. We actually got 14% in the general election of the vote. That was bang in line with our polling.
So on this point, it's kind of technically correct to say that reform did end up in line with the polling that Ben Habib is talking about. I mean, as you can see, as it got through to the end of 2023, going into 2024, they were certainly on the rise. And then as you get closer to the election, and as it's actually called, it starts to slump a bit. You can see right at the end it goes right up. You know, why does that happen? I would wager it's because that is when Nigel Farage said he's coming out of retirement. I mean, they go right up in the polls. What I'm trying to say is that, okay, they got to, 18, 19% in the polls and they end up with about 14%, whatever. You can't really then make the assumption that if they were around, 16%, as Ben Habib's claiming, but as I say, they're on a bit of a slump until Farage joins, there's no guarantee that you would then get 14% again. We have every reason to think that actually it will be closer to maybe 10 or 12%, and that can lose you the 5 seats that you had. Obviously, we don't know, it's all speculation, but I think it's incredibly wrong for Ben Habib to assume that you'd still have those 5 seats without Farage. You can see from this polling alone, clearly his popularity had a massive impact, where they ended up gaining 5 to 6 points in the polls. It's undoubted. You cannot doubt this.
In fact, Nigel, Carl, in my view, was damaging to our electoral prospects during the general election because he sucked up so much capital, so much resource into Clacton. The whole reform machinery went round Clacton. I had zero support in Wellingborough. I paid for my entire election campaign myself, and I had zero support. And I implored Nigel to come and help me, and he didn't.
Sorry, but again, this is just complete nonsense. It was a national campaign. And as you were saying, you were funding yourself. Guess who else was? Rupert Lowe. Guess where Farage didn't go? Great Yarmouth. I'm sorry, it's an absurdity to say he didn't help. Don't even try and claim that he damaged reform. At best, you can say he didn't do much, but even that's obviously just ridiculous. It's been obvious to me for some time that Ben has had a bee in his bonnet about Nigel Farage, and clearly him coming back, stealing the limelight, and frankly directly helping reform is seen as a bad thing by Ben Habib. Why? Because frankly I think he's projecting. Perhaps Ben's the narcissist here. Ben's the one trying to take claim for all this. Hell, Ben's trying to take claim for the whole Rupert Lowe drama. This is how stupid the man is. This is Reform's most embarrassing time in history, and here's Rupert Lowe taking credit for the most embarrassing time in history for Reform. It's absolutely nuts.
He didn't even, well, as you know, I haven't spoken to him since he appointed himself leader. No, Nigel was damaging to our general election. So the idea, and we got there without Nigel. And we were going to, even if Nigel hadn't come back, we were going to go higher in the polls after winning 5 seats.
Just Carl sitting there agreeing with all this. I'm sorry, you have no integrity of a journalist based off this video. This is horrendously embarrassing. It's obviously not true. There is absolutely no way that you can say, yeah, we were definitely going to get those 5 seats anyway without Nigel Farage. There's no guarantee to that. In fact, beyond that, he's saying it's damaging as well. How is it not obvious to anyone that this is Ben giving his vibes-based analysis on all this? This is as bad as Rory Stewart.
Under Richard Tice, we would have gone higher in the polls because people would have looked at Reform and said, wow, oh my God, they are not just a protest vote, they've actually got seats.
Sorry, how are you agreeing with Rupert Lowe that it's a protest party, yet suddenly, if the exact same thing happened but under Richard Tice, who by the way is still deputy leader and still is massively involved with the party, it's no longer a protest party. This is absurdity. How can you possibly take this at face value? I'm sorry it's taken an hour for me to get into this point, but this is just absurd. How are you taking that seriously?
And that's seismic. We broke into the first past the post system. We got 5 seats and we came second in 98 seats. Under the first past the post, with the right policies and the right people, we could win a general election. It's not nonsense.
I just love this idea that Ben is putting out all this claptrap that they said actually had nothing to do. Actually, we would have done better without Farage. The exact same things would have happened. I'm sorry, that is ridiculous. That is something that should not even be entertained. And look, there's no pushback on this.
We could do it, but you've got to have the right people. And you can't get the right people if you have a despot, a narcissistic, prickly, adolescent despot in charge of Reform.
Just to fully understand what was said in that entire tirade there, Ben Habib's claim is that we would have won 5 seats anyway. We were going up in the polls. Not true, as I've just been through, by the way. We wouldn't have been seen with a protest party. All of that would have been possible without Farage. What he's basically done is described what happened when Farage was leader and then said none of that is actually possible with Farage as leader. And for some reason, Carl's nodded along to that. I'm sorry, but you are not looking at this in any way with objectivity. Everyone here, both people, in this discussion have frankly, a grudge against Nigel Farage. That is what has happened here, and they are coming up with ludicrous scenarios that don't hold any water when put under any scrutiny. But this wasn't supposed to be an interview with any sort of pushback. This was supposed to be an interview to bash Farage. That much is obvious to me, and I'm fed up with it. There is no attempt here to be fair or courteous in any way. This is people planting their flag in one side because, frankly, Ben Habib seems to have been wanting this for quite some time and probably influencing it, and Carl's going right along with it. It's frankly horrendous in terms of both argumentation and in terms of giving you content that is in any way going to improve your understanding of the situation. It's absurd that they posted this.
Yeah, now I actually firmly find myself falling into this camp because, like you said, not only at one point when Nigel Farage wasn't leading it peaked at 21% of a poll.
Another ludicrous statement. Here is just a snapshot of polls around the time Nigel Farage became leader. As you can see below it, Reform, they are the third column from the right or the second with percentages from the right. As you can see beforehand, typically they're around 10, 11%, some 9s, some 12s, 114 actually. And as you can see from that, we're saying around 11, 10%. That's a pretty good average there. Nigel Farage joins, bumps right up, all of them, to an average of about 14, 15. In fact, no, it's close to 15, 16. Sorry, but that is an instant average uppage of 4 points. It's just ridiculous to try and say damage the party. And also, just to compare to the peak that we saw on the aggregate graph, around the April-May time, which is when they peaked at what looked like around 15%, as you can see, second from the right with percentages, once again, they peak at about 15%. That's where they peak. That's the largest one we see. I don't know where in God's name Carl has got this 21% from. I've gone through this whole thing. I can't find a single one where they even reach 18 before Farage joined. It's total nonsense. In fact, no, I'll go further. I'm having trouble finding anything that goes above 16 in this time period. It's just total nonsense. He's just made it up. And this is what I mean. He's let the vibes get to him. Don't like Farage. Oh, they were actually reaching 21 before he joined, before the general election. Before he became leader. Why did they bother making him leader? Oh, it's because this is the truth, Carl. They were barely breaking 15%. As soon as he joined, they broke 15%. It must tell you something, that.
But also, Nigel Farage seems to essentially be claiming the victory in Clacton, but that was ground laid for him by Douglas Carswell back in 2015, I think it was, when he won the by-election there.
Sorry, Carl, once again, just total nonsense. The by-election, which won 21,000 votes, which was a pretty stonking majority, then ended up with Douglas Carswell, sure, winning it again in the general election, but dropping quite a bit. Both of these elections had Nigel Farage as leader of the parliament, of the party, but he was an MEP at the time, so couldn't run. So to try and say that this was actually Douglas Carswell doing all the groundwork here, yeah, he will have done work, don't get me wrong. But again, an awful lot of people vote for parties based on their leader. It's ridiculous to try and say that he had nothing to do with this. This is just such cope and seethe. I actually can't believe he put this out.
And this, Nigel Farage only came back to reform because the polling out of Clacton put a reform victory in there. And so he unceremoniously threw under the bus whoever was the person there we go, the person who's supposed to be the candidate in reform, in Clacton, threw them under the bus, and then made it all about himself.
I'm sorry, but it's how does parliamentary politics work? Oh, it's nuts, isn't it? You try and put your own leader in a safe seat. What a shock! What an absolute shock! I can't believe they do that. Not only that though, but he made himself leader again. He went through something like a week after the announcement of the general election was made, campaigning for reform. He's made it very clear that as he's going around, there is mass public, frankly, outcry that he is not running as a politician, and that's what made him change his mind. As he constantly says, I had a cussy job. As Ben Habib says, he wanted to make money before. I may not have actually put that clip in, but Nigel Farage said his idea was just to make money. Wow, things change when you get mass popularity of people basically crying out for you to do something for them. And then, I'm sorry, he goes in and wins by the same amount of votes as Douglas Carswell. I don't think we can thank Douglas Carswell necessarily all for that. He did work, as I say, but I'm sorry, it's clear that Nigel Farage went there because 1, it's a safe seat, and 2, he was guaranteed to win it, 3, it will get him into Parliament, and 4, you kind of need your party leader to be in Parliament to be an effective parliamentary party. This cynicism is not becoming of you. It is ridiculous, in fact. Get a grip. Anyway, they then start going into if Rupert does go and make his own party, he'll be an MP already, he'll lead from the front, and it won't just be an insurgent party, despite the fact that Reform is still an insurgent party because they're still going up in the polls and they've only got 5 MPs. Anyway, he goes on to describe that he thinks it'll be very popular because there'll be a lot of people on Rupert's side, people who've been kicked out of Reform that he can't name, for example, and people on X who, frankly, at this point, I don't actually think are too involved in party politics anyway. But he goes on to say this.
And as you say, it has to be a broad tent. You've got to take everyone in from the movement. You can't say, well, he's not welcome. He said something, nasty once. Everyone, for God's sake, someone said something nasty once. That doesn't exclude them from, public activity.
I don't think you could ask for a bigger recipe for disaster. Obviously, people that we are saying are ceremoniously kicked out. I'm not being funny. If we're including Bo Dade and Dan Bull here from the Lotus Eaters, it wasn't exactly unceremonious. They just said stupid things. As I say, the Lotus Eaters have been edgy boys for some time, and it's not exactly shocking that there's people who understand that and have some clips of that. Like, I'm sorry, we're in a time where you have to keep your nose clean. Because things that you would normally say at the pub are now broadcast everywhere. It's a problem that I'm going to run into, no doubt, if I ever do try and get into real-life politics. And the only thing I can do is say, sorry, I was 20, it's online, yeah, I totally retract it all. And it might not be good enough. Oh well. It's my own choice in life coming back to bite me. It's just how it works. But as I say, if this ends up happening, you have Rupert Lowe backed up with Ben Habib, backed up with Musk Money, backed up with Lotus Eaters and a load of the online right, it's a recipe for disaster. I'm afraid to say. You're gonna see if this does come up, you're gonna see lots of media interviews saying, what do you have to say about this comment, that comment, stuff that was in Hope Not Hate. Fine, I don't like Hope Not Hate. Still questions that are going to be asked and you have to deal with. We know the situation we're in. We should have decades of experience here. And basically what has been said by Ben Habib here is, yes, I am ready to deal with those bear traps, rather than, avoiding them. I'm sorry, this is basic electoral politics. If you don't like it, then enjoy the irrelevancy. That's simply what has happened every time you try and just ignore these obvious bear traps.
Nigel's right-hand man, who has no democratic position, isn't an executive of reform, has nothing to do ostensibly with the party Reform UK, is a guy called George Cottrell, who's a convicted flipping felon. But that doesn't stop Nigel from having him as his right. He's never more than 5 yards from Nigel.
Sorry, but just to bring it back to the Bo Dade point, to compare it to this, if one of the MPs is a convicted felon, by the way, but if you've done your jail time and served your sentence, we're supposed to believe in restorative justice here. You can be let back in society. So I'm afraid having that history doesn't exactly mean that you have to let everyone in. That's an absurd statement. But also, as I say, bringing Bo Dade on it for an example, when these points were brought up to him, and it's like, oh, he said migrants were a plague in Britain or whatever. You might agree with that, you might not. The point is that he didn't try and deny it. He didn't try and apologise for it. He just said, I stand by every word. And what are reform supposed to do with that? Oh, he's going to be a pain then. We can't have that. It's not reform's job to put out your fires for you. And you just poured petrol on the whole thing. Why would they keep you?
So you've got the sanitized strategy, in which you must have only people who are 100% approved of by the mainstream media. So people who essentially have never used social media, or have never made a joke, or have never said anything interesting in their entire political career and in their public presence.
Sorry, but there is a massive difference here, isn't there? You can probably have this history as long as you basically delete it. It's just the reality we live in. I think if I was ever to try and join reform, I'm just going to have to private everything. It's just the reality of the situation. And I don't feel good about doing that, but it's the reality we live in and we have to deal with it. But not only that, if you do get caught out on this, apologise for it. It's not difficult. It should not... Reform do not have the resources to put out all these fires. They are not established enough to get through these fires that these people will make. We might just have to have a whole deal where everyone deletes their social media accounts and starts anew. It's not exactly the worst thing in the world, and to be honest with you, it's probably not... I mean, it's a bit different for me, because obviously my massive YouTube channel. Massive as in number of videos, not number of subscribers, necessarily. But, it's a choice we'll all have to make. And yeah, it's the route they've gone down. Okay, try going down a different route, see how it goes. You actually tried this before, by the way, with UKIP, Carl. I don't understand why you've not learned lessons from that.
Or you can take the Donald Trump, Steve Bannon approach, which is flood the zone. Just have everyone, all the time, everywhere. So there's just no point in the media making a big deal about one person saying one thing somewhere else.
It's something I'm going to have to repeat forever, it seems, but we are not America. We are not in the same cultural landscape as America, the same media landscape. They're a little bit more entrenched here, Our best version of alternative narratives to the mainstream is GB News, really, unironically. And they're not exactly going to allow people who are going to be breaking Ofcom rules onto their station. However, they let someone like Matt Goodwin on, and he's been saying some awfully spicy things over the past few months. So it's quite clear you're allowed in there if you're willing to push the Overton window a bit, as long as you're not moronic about it. That's the basic takeaway here. I mean, try it again, Carl, by all means. Try and flood the zone with an awful lot of people who are going to effectively be smearing you all the time. It's going to happen, so why give them ammunition for it? That's all that's being asked by reform. Just don't give the MSN ammunition on you. It won't be good. Anyway, they then start going into how Trump wasn't invited to the inauguration, and even though he was over in America, he didn't quite have the front row seat with Donald Trump as he used to have, and they're trying to say, oh, that's because Trump and Elon Musk see him for who he really is. I'm not going to lie here, I think that's a blessing in disguise. I think it's a good opportunity then for effectively reform to kind of distance themselves from Musk and Trump, because they are deeply unpopular figures here. And I think it's going to help them. And again, we have no idea why there's been a distance been put in between there. But obviously there's going to be speculation here, but I think it's stupid to speculate, but they love doing it anyway because, it's embarrassing for Farage, isn't it? Well, maybe it's a blessing in disguise, you know? Anyway, nearly an hour and a half here. I've had a lot to say today, and it's a lot that's been playing on my mind for some time now. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I've been somewhat disappointed with Lotus Eaters' coverage of things for probably over a year now, to be honest. I just don't say anything publicly because I don't really see the point in, attacking them, really. But after this whole series of events, after this video and some others in particular, all about reform and Nigel Farage, I mean, I understand I'm a reform activist and I'm going to have biases here, but I think it's fair when I went through that entire part where they were basically saying Nigel Farage actually damaged the party, or at the very least didn't help it when he joined. There's just no evidence to back that up. There's all this cope and see that it's actually these other very good people, and I'm sure they are very good people that were actually the real people doing the legwork here. It's just obviously not true. Nigel Farage clearly does an awful lot of legwork. Nigel Farage is all over the country for the past few months trying to build the damn thing up. You know, there's a conference every other day, and Nigel Farage is at all of them, and people clearly still like him. You know, his favourability has gone down over the past week, sure, yeah, that's, you know, a mixture of Trump and this Rupert Lowe thing, there's no doubt about it. But I think with this claim that he's got rid of all other people for trumped-up charges, these narratives never seem to stick, and there never seems to be any particularly good evidence to back that all up. Because, as I say, most of the time, either people leave of their own volition, or they have actually said something remarkably stupid that it's just untenable to keep them in. And I think with Rupert Lowe, a similar thing has probably happened. When they say he's not been at meetings and all that, I mean, according to Reform side of things, he's basically not bothered to go to them. From his side, he's not been invited. Truth's somewhere probably in between. He probably didn't go to a couple, and then they stopped bothering doing it. Plus, then you had differences in how they should move forward ideologically. Then you have differences in what to say to the media. Then you have differences on really spicy issues like, say, Tommy Robinson. And I think they just had enough of it. And I think, as well, with the interview, it was very revealing, as I say, that it was all Ben Habib's own issues with the party. And so to me, it just looks like all these issues he's pushed are all issues Ben Habib doesn't shut up about. And so it just looks like Ben Habib's envoy. You know, the party's going to notice that. They're going to notice that someone who admitted in this very video that he's had ideological differences with Nigel Farage for quite some years and effectively does not like him and holds a grudge against him. Suddenly it turns out that Rupert Lowe's actually he's saying all this in public, so obviously he's saying it in private as well. You know, Reform are going to notice that, so of course they're going to start freezing him out of things and hope that they can keep a lid on the whole thing. But when he brings it public, how could they not? Now, again, I want to make one thing very clear at the end here. I've been talking about realpolitik throughout this video. You know, commentary on the details of what's happened to Lowe with the allegations and all that. That's mainly for the other videos, which you really should watch as well. However, it is clearly a massive absurdity to put your flag in either camp, because there's reasons to be sceptical of either side. As I go through in other videos, there's more reason to be sceptical of Rupert, from what I can tell. However, that doesn't mean that I'm going to be staying with Reform if it turns out they've thrown Rupert under the bus and Ben Habib has actually been accurate in what he said. But going throughout this, I have even less reason to be sure of that, to be quite honest with you. But I can tell you now, if they do go off and make their own party, I'm not going to be a part of that either. I'll go back to being politically homeless, because I don't think it's going to be useful. I don't think it will get us anywhere. I think actually it will damage the right more than it will help, yet again. And that's not a good position to be in when we actually kind of need to get away from the uniparty again. Why do you think that the Tory party, which is so good at what it does, which wins all the time because it's good at containing its threats to the right, why do you think they are largely taking Rupert Lowe's side? Why do you think that they are saying there's an open door for Rupert Lowe to join them? That has been said. I have covered it before. Why does it look like the Tory establishment is all on Lowe's side? You've got to start thinking about these things in that sort of way as well. Realpolitik, it is clear that Nigel Farage is not being accepted by the mainstream. That is just nuts. It is clear he is the insurgent guy, and it is clear that Rupert Lowe is likely to be contained in all this, or go off, do his own thing with Ben Habib, and fall into irrelevancy. He's a good MP. That's not good enough to get you anywhere in politics, I'm afraid. But as I say, nothing is confirmed yet. We know probably 15 to 20% or something of this whole ordeal, with the details that have come out. We're not going to know anything for sure for some time. So all the commentary around this I have found fantastically hysterical. This entire video has been an absolute embarrassment, frankly, from both Ben Habib and Carl. I know Carl is better than this, and so I find this frankly horrifying, especially from someone who, frankly, made his channel to effectively emulate the Sargon of old, the Sargon of, 2015 onwards, or whenever he started, I don't really know. I joined around Brexit 2016 and binged his content, and he made me think, well, if he can do it, why not me? I know an awful lot of these things, I can read into all this, and I know I have an analytical brain. And it's just such a shame to see a fall from grace from being analytical to talking about total nonsense and just making completely ludicrous statements that have no basis in fact whatsoever. It's the opposite reason I was attracted to Carl and his content in the first place. And I am nothing but disappointed in what he has been saying, not just in this video, but things over the past year or so. He's never been particularly good at real politics. He's never particularly been good at electoral politics, and that's fine. His philosophy stuff has got merit. But my goodness, the current events commentary, as far as I'm concerned, it's not listening to anymore. I'm done with it. I can't possibly ever say to... I can't possibly recommend the Lotus Eaters to anyone if their head guy has this much misinformation in a chat with someone who admits they have a grudge against Farage and does nothing to try and push back on it. This was literally no different to listening to Nigel Farage being talked about on Sky News or something like that. Nothing based in reality, just trying to effectively smear him. That's effectively all you've done here. And it's not good. It's horrific, in fact. And I think it needs to be straightened out. And I'm afraid no one's saying that to you because, well, we all want to be popular, don't we? And we don't... if you're the person speaking out saying, actually, this is pretty terrible to the one popular guy, well, you're going to get a reaction. So, not a lot of people do it. I've got nothing to lose. Here I am saying, improve yourself, Carl. You're better than this. Right, anyway, I think with that it's time to end. So shill time, laughing at the Guardians on this Saturday. My brother's going to be on, along with Tharium and Mercian. So I think we're going to have a lot to talk about there, so do come along to that. It'll be a good laugh, I think. We're going to get him to defend why he thinks Labour's better than the Tories post-election, but, well, we'll see. Next Monday, Peloponnesian War should be back, and also on Tuesday we'll be doing Tosh Talks. Don't know what the topic is yet, but we'll put the poll out on Friday. Right, with that, if you want to help out the channel, subscribe, like, leave a comment telling me what you think. I do interact with an awful lot of them. And not only that, if you want to do a bit more than that, you can always give super chats and super thanks on these videos and live streams, and you can also become a member to get access to all the laughing of the Guardians that I've done in the past. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate absolutely everyone that is willing to directly give money to me. It's deeply, deeply appreciated. I would not be making as many videos as I am without you. But I think with that, as I say, that's everything I have for you for today. So once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.